start by cutting out the bare overalls pattern with paper scissors, and then you need to take the two pieces that make up the waistband and tape those together. And there's some marks on the one pattern that line up with the same marks on the other, and this is not the center front line. That's an important thing to note, because otherwise your band will be too small. So you want to tape those together on that line, just like that, and then your pattern is ready to put on the fabric. These are the supplies that I'll be using for the bare overalls. So I have the striped fabric, which is my main fabric, and it is a cotton material. I have this white that I'm going to use for lining for the front apron piece. You'll need 2 buttons and 1 snap, and these ones are a clear kind of plastic snap, but other types of snaps are fine as well for this. I'm starting the layout with the main body of the overall. So we have our piece of fabric here. These 2 edges that are finished on the one side are called selvages. Opposite that I have the fold line. And then this is the raw edge. This is also a raw edge. Looks different because it's been cut by a pair of scissors, which I did not do on that edge after I washed it. So for this particular garment, you're going to modify the fold. This is a fairly typical fold where you have the 2 selvages lined up with each other opposite the fold line. For the bare, we have 1 piece that we need just 1 of. So I'm going to do a modified fold. Where I have a single layer of fabric on one side and then a double layer on the other side. And my waistband is going to go on that single layer. And this is 0.4 meters of fabric, which is pretty much the exact amount that you need. And then the other pieces, I'm looking at ways to save fabric when I do things like this as well. So whatever works to have the biggest piece of leftover fabric is the way that I do it. So I'm going to do this like this today. We have grain line arrows. Now the waistband does not have a grain line arrow, but this line down the middle that is the fold line essentially is a grain line. And so what I would do is pin one end of that and then measure to the edge of the selvage. And then you want the other end to be the same distance from the selvage. So I would position that one and pin it. And then you're going to pin the corners. And so on the band, I would pin each of the ends. And you'll notice that I'm putting the pins a little bit slanted towards the center. Generally, what I say is right angles to the edge of the pattern. The corner ones I do angle. You also want to make sure that the inside of the pin, the end of the pin is inside the waistband, because when we cut this out, we don't want to have to be moving the pins while we're cutting around the outside of the pattern. So we're going to do the same thing with each of these pieces with a grain line arrow. So you're pinning one end and measuring, and then you want the other end to be the same distance. So just adjusting slightly for that. And then you pin the corners. And on this one, I'm going to put a pin here, one up here, another one here. And I will do the same for these. Now this piece goes on the fold line. So I'm going to start by pinning the fold, and you want this edge right on the edge of the fabric. Otherwise you make the piece bigger than it's supposed to be. So I'm doing 2 pins on the fold. These can stick out over the edge because I'm not going to cut that edge. And when you're done pinning, you're going to cut each of these out, cutting along the exterior edge close to the edge of the pattern with long, smooth cutting strokes. Then we need to cut out our second overall front, the lining piece. So I'm using this white fabric. And I'm just going to fold right here because I just need enough for this piece. And again, you want an even fold. So I'm just going to quickly measure and make sure that it is folded evenly on both ends, which it is. So I'm going to take the pins out of this piece, pin to here, same as the last time. And all our pieces are now cut out. There are markings on the pattern, like these dots, that need to be transferred to the fabric so that we can use them while we're actually sewing. So I have here a chalk pencil and some tailor's chalk, which are options that could be used. These ones happen to be white, not a great color for this fabric, but my favorite one is a friction pen. You should test this on your fabric, but in my experience with most fabrics, it easily comes off using the steam from an iron. What we're going to do is start with the waistband. The markings almost always go on the wrong side of the fabric. There are exceptions, but usually on the wrong side. So we're going to start at the center back line here, and there are 2 dots on either side of that line. You can either mark the dots or you can make marks where the line is. I'm just going to do the dots here, and we're going to mark the wrong side. So I've put a pin through each of those dots, and then I just make a mark with my pen where that pin is going through the fabric. And then we're going to go down to now this dot I'm going to ignore. We'll deal with, that's for placement for the strap, and we can deal with that later on when we're ready to put the straps on. So the next 2 dots here, this marks where the side seam is on the overall. So again, 1 dot on each side. Center front is a good one to mark as well. So this one I am just going to mark. You don't have to draw the whole line. If you want, you can, but I'm just lifting up the edge of the pattern and making a line on the fabric where that is. Then we come down here, and again we have 2 dots. And you'll notice I'm removing some of the pins as I go, but I'm leaving at least 1 pin in because I don't want my pattern to shift while I'm doing this. So dot right here, dot right here, and then we're going to mark these 2 dots at the end right here. And that's all we need to mark on the waistband. Now I'm going to leave the pattern on until I'm actually ready to sew, because sometimes I need to double check something. And I also don't throw away pattern pieces until I'm done a project. On the overall front, there's a dot right here that needs to be marked. So again, pin through the fabric. Now on this fabric, it's white, but it actually has some little stars on it. So it does have a right and wrong side. So I'm going to mark the inside, which is the wrong side. And again, each piece of fabric needs that marking. Now this piece was also on this one. So I just need to repin so I can also mark that dot on this fabric. So again, poke through the dot and wrong side. And I'm just going to put these together and pin because those are the same piece. On the strap, you actually don't have to mark anything. There is a fold line down the middle, but the fold line is right in the center. So if I fold in half, that's where that is. So I don't need to mark that particular one. This is the overall front, and there's no dots or anything that need to be marked on that. So the only other one to mark is this one. So there are two things on here. One of them is this dot right here. So again, you have to mark both sides where that is. And then we need to mark this dart here. So I'm going to put, there are 3 dots. And a dart is something that we use to shape fabric to fit to our body, in this case the bear, because he does have some shape. So again, wrong side of the fabric, because that's where we're going to be looking when we sew. And then the dot at the end as well. Now, there are some dotted lines here. These are our sewing lines. If you've been sewing for a while and you can sew a straight line and you can visualize, you can sew this without those lines. You can simply, you know, after you fold it, you can visualize and sew from the dot to the dot. But often beginning sewers need a little bit more. So with this pattern, there's a couple ways you could do this. One is we could use another marking method using tracing paper and a wheel, and we would put the paper in here and trace this line and it would show up on the fabric. But I'm actually just going to take a ruler. Now, darts are not always perfectly straight, but this particular one is. So I'm just going to draw that line with the edge of my seam gauge and do that on both sides. So I'm just connecting the dot at the bottom. And when we sew this, we are going to go right to the edge of the fabric. So I'm extending it above the dot there. So there's the dart. And then you can also do that center line as well. And the center line, you might need to mark where that is, but I can tell by the shape of the, as long as you've cut accurately, there's a little extension where it goes. And the center line is the fold line where we fold this when we're going to sew it. So that's the marking for the pieces that we're going to use for the bear overalls.